Okay, you ready?
Yeah, I'm ready. Are you ready?
I guess so.
Okay.
Let's do this.
Let's do this. It's time for Sound Politics.
Welcome to Sound Politics. I'm Libby Denkmann.
And I'm Scott Greenstone. And if you were planning on heading over to the Snoqualmie area this weekend, maybe hit up the annual Twin Peaks convention in North Bend, pay your respects to the late, great David Lynch, get some cherry pie at Tweedy's Cafe.
Tweeds.
It's Tweeds? Oh, my God. Thank you. I can't be called out by listeners.
You can't
I gotta get it right.
Yourself.
I had to listen to There Was a Fish in the Percolator to get the right wording.
Talk to a log. Have a damn fine cup of coffee. Watch out for Bob. All this good stuff.
There was a fish in the percolator. But, you know, if after that, all of that Twin Peaks greatness, you were planning to snowshoe to Franklin Falls, I have bad news. Okay? I cannot recommend that because according to a Facebook post from the Mountains to Sound Greenway Trust, a sign was posted on the trailhead earlier this week. Due to the large-scale termination of Forest Service employees, Franklin Falls and the Denny Creek Trailhead are closed. This site will reopen when we return to appropriate staffing levels.
Just for the record, you can access Franklin Falls.
Yeah.
Apparently, the other trailhead is just an extra 5 miles on an access road. And there are no toilets, according to the Seattle Times.
Yeah, thanks for fact-checking me, Libby. But so I'm bringing this up because it feels like an early manifestation of President Trump's cuts at the federal level, physically affecting the lives of people who don't work for or get money from or need some kind of legal documentation from the federal government. Trump cut thousands of Forest Service and National Parks employees nationwide last week on his quest to shrink the federal government and, save taxpayer money, is what he says. But the federal government is all around us in the PNW. There are 56,000 civilian federal employees just in Washington state, from the Puget Sound Navy shipyard in Bremerton to the Hanford nuclear site. When things are going okay, it's easy to kind of forget about them,
Yeah, I mean, layoffs are now hitting the Bonneville Power Administration, which provides half the electricity in Washington state.
Half.
Many other agencies under the Energy Department, like Hanford. Beyond that, I mean, you name it. People were cut from the Department of Agriculture to the National Weather Service. The Forest Service. The Seattle Times reported that about 30% of the Mount Baker Snoqualmie National Forest workforce was let go, and that led to the Franklin Falls closure. And Democratic lawmakers are warning that the effects of these layoffs are going to be felt soon by the wider public. Yeah,
so that's what we're talking about today on the show. And we also want to figure out what it's like to be a federal employee in the PNW in this fraught moment. But obviously, these people are a little scared to talk on the record.
And that's why today on the show we have our source whisperer, KUOW investigative reporter Ashley Hiruko, joining us for Sound Politics. Hey, Ashley, thanks so much for being here.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me.
So tell us more about the vibes inside these federal agencies. What are you hearing from folks? I mean, it can't be good.
It's not good. I mean, people are overwhelmingly afraid. They've described the last few weeks as chaos, uncertainty, and there's also this email that's gone out across the country that's inviting federal employees to snitch on their coworkers that continue DEI work because that's no longer allowed.
Yeah, so DEI work, even if it's under another name, people are being asked to inform on each other, which that's not a good way to foster a supportive work environment, I would imagine.
Exactly. And, some people are afraid to sport their rainbow lanyards at work because of this.
Ashley, you and Scott and our colleagues John Ryan and Ann Dornfeld teamed up to talk to 15 employees across 7 agencies. Can you kind of give us a sense of the range of work affected here?
Yeah, so I spoke to scientists, lawyers. One colleague spoke to employees at the Veterans Affairs. Scott, who did you speak with?
I talked to folks who work on transit grants for local bus and train agencies. Some of our colleagues like John Ryan spoke to EPA employees who worked on environmental justice. He wrote that involves helping communities that breathe, eat, and drink more than their fair share of pollution. And I will also say the vibes were not good. I talked to one person who works in disaster response who just said she's getting emails all the time saying, look through all your contracts and find and eliminate everything that has to do with DEI. And she's like, I don't have any contracts that have to do with DEI. And the requests and the demands keep coming.
Yeah. And Scott, you've been looking into what terminations are happening and how they could actually affect average people. I mean, beyond the trail closures, what are you seeing?
Yeah, it's hard to tell still, right? We're getting our heads around how many folks, because the feds are not being super transparent or responsive about how, wide-ranging the terminations are. At the U.S. Forest Service, for instance, it's about a 10% cut nationwide. But, I talked to Congresswoman Kim Schreier, and she tells me it's disproportionately high here. And it's a lot more than trails. It could mean fewer people to rescue or aid stranded hikers in places like the Enchantments. Wildland firefighters are supposed to be exempt, but right now it seems like the funding freeze, it did mess with the hiring of seasonal firefighters for wildfire season, at least according to sources I talked to. They're supposed to be training right now for fire season. And instead, many of them maybe are looking for other seasonal work.
And these cuts could really affect the energy grid too, right. Scott?
Yeah. The Bonneville, you mentioned the Bonneville Power Administration at the beginning, which folks might know from the Bonneville Dam, famous hydroelectric power source, gives us more than half our electricity. A spokesperson, at Bonneville didn't comment, but did confirm that they, what's been reported in media, that they lost 230 people to the deferred resignation, the fork in the road email process. And they lost 130-ish probationary employees, but they turned around and hired about 30 back on this week.
Those were whoopsies.
Yeah, whoopsies, yeah. And then 90 people, had their offers rescinded when the hiring freeze went down. So hundreds of line workers and just people that are out, in the field. And the impact on people other than those line workers, I was trying to get my head around that. I really like this former administrator named Randall Hardy told a TV station in Portland, the sky's not falling and you're not going to automatically have a power outage, but you have increased the risk of having an unplanned power outage from less than 1% to something in the 5 to 10% range. Another source close to Bonneville told me that's probably an exaggeration, but they did lose some important, field workers.
So the reasoning given for these quick cuts from people like Elon Musk and Russ Vought, who's the director of the OMB now, is to cut government waste and fraud. That's something you hear again and again. But it's also pretty explicitly to demoralize the federal workers and even, quote, put them in trauma. That's an actual Russ Vought quote. That's the goal. Get them to quit. Come out with a smaller civil service that's more loyal to President Trump. And I just keep coming back to this. It kind of puts the lie to the idea that this is all about efficiency. Like, if you were actually trying to make a government better, you would audit the workforce and base downsizing on actual performance. These fork in the road, the mass probationary firings, that's the sledgehammer approach. That's not about finding people who are bad at their jobs. That's just about the raw cuts. Ashley, I mean, what did federal workers tell you about the attacks that they're hearing from the president and his allies, that they're inefficient or lazy or non-essential?
I mean, the 6 people that I spoke with, they seem to have a unanimous opinion that, about these emails that they're receiving calling them lazy. One, they view these attacks as stereotypes they've heard before. And 2, they said that this is just one approach that the Trump administration is taking to get federal workers to leave willingly by belittling them.
What did they say to you, Scott?
Yeah, one of them in a press conference yesterday, forest ranger got laid off, said, if the goal was to traumatize us, it's working. Like, good job, Russ Vought. A lot of them bristled at the idea that they don't work hard. I talked to Emily Connor, who was a grants manager at the Federal Transit Administration until Friday. She was cut, and many of her other coworkers, she says. There's now only 4 grant managers for the whole PNW, like Washington, Oregon, Idaho, and Alaska, to shepherd these federal grants through all the red tape and get them to local transit agencies like Sound Transit here in Seattle, Pierce Transit down in Tacoma, light rail buses, tribal transit agencies. She's worried that they won't be able to get that money and might end up having to furlough people. There's a cut we have from her.
I really just don't know how people are going to be able to get the work done. We never had any time at FTA to sit idle in any way, shape, or form. And I just don't think that there's going to be any way that the people left are going to be able to pick up all of the work that had to be dropped when this firing happened.
And Libby, I just want to hop in and say that and remind, listeners about the climate that these workers are living in. Not only are they receiving these almost daily emails from the federal government kind of belittling them, pushing them to resign, to leave, saying go to the private sector where you could be more productive. But they're also living on edge because they don't know if they're going to be fired without cause.
Yeah, these emails that went out to the probationary employees, they are mostly form emails. They don't have specifics about performance issues for any of these employees. And of course, Democrats are not happy about this. I talked to Rick Larson this week, the congressman from Washington's 2nd District, so up north, Bellingham, Everett, San Juan Islands. He's a Democrat. And he's like, yeah, Democrats are in the minority. There might be some leverage coming up in the upcoming budget and debt ceiling debate because Republicans' advantage in the House is so slim, 3 seats. And the caucus Republicans have needed Democratic votes in the past to avoid a government shutdown. But Republicans know this, and President Trump and Mike Johnson, they're doing their damnedest to get this big budget reconciliation package passed on a party line vote. Will it work? Unclear. There are a bunch of GOP holdouts right now. And Larson even said that people at a recent town hall were saying, you got to do more. Why aren't you personally suing the Trump administration over the funding freezes and the layoffs? Larson's like, well, members of Congress don't have standing to do that. But he does believe that many of the court challenges are the best way to counter Trump and Elon Musk right now. Ashley, it sounds like that's echoed by the people that you've talked to, that they want to see more fight from Democrats, right?
Oh, most definitely. They're mobilizing. They're out there protesting. They're out in the cold, in front of federal buildings. And sources are saying, okay, our elected officials need to be doing more, too, because we're fighting alone. They need to go get arrested, just like Congressman John Lewis did 45 times, including his last arrest in 2013 at the Capitol. This one source said that she wished more Congress people would do some good trouble.
I asked Congresswoman Emily Randall, who represents the 6th District. That's Kitsap, Tacoma. It has over half of the civilian federal employees in the state. And, she was like, well, we're talking about it. Maybe what are the tools of maybe more civil disobedience? She was one of those Democrats who went to the Treasury Department to kind of demand access to and information about what's happening, the sensitive data systems of payment. She was denied entry and they had a press conference on the sidewalk. Then she was like, well, I'm encouraging all of my constituents to write op-eds, speak out, those kinds of things. It's not...
Op-eds. That's going to do it. Op-eds are going to do it. What about Republican lawmakers, Scott? What are they saying?
A lot of state-level Republicans say they're not too worried for the most part. These cuts might just be part of the growing pains of a new administration, settling into their, new roles. What's happening is still a little blurry, et cetera. On the congressional level, Representative Dan Newhouse, who represents Yakima and Central Washington, he sent a statement saying, hey, I want to reduce the federal government too. But, and this is his quote, I have communicated to the Trump administration that there should be a more nuanced approach to terminations and furloughs. I have concerns that the unintended consequences of these workforce reductions will have long-lasting implications at Hanford, the Pacific Northwest National Laboratory, and Bonneville Power Administration.
Yeah, again, concern about the sledgehammer approach, looking for more nuance. I don't know that anybody would say, yeah, the federal government is perfect. There's no bloat. And I wonder even if Democratic lawmakers are using this opportunity to say, okay, we don't like the approach that's being taken. There are ways, though, that the federal government could be better. Are you hearing anything like that?
I did ask Emily Randall and Kim Schreier that question, too, Democratic Congresswomen. Randall said, basically, if you want to talk about bureaucratic, well, let's talk about how many times a poor person has to prove they're poor to get all the benefits they're legally entitled to. And Schreier said, improving electronic health records at the VA. So yeah, but, they both emphasize this, I think you called it a sledgehammer approach, is not the way to do it.
I once rode in an elevator with Grover Nordquist, who's been called the high priest of Republican tax cutting. He's the source of that famous "let's shrink government so we can drown it in a bathtub" quote from the early 2000s. So I do think that having rode in that elevator, I feel qualified to like zoom out and have a big picture idea here.
Please.
This is the culmination of this decades-long ideological struggle about the size of government. In the past, when Republicans have tried to slash spending to a large degree, they've run up against this simple truth that outside of defense, the really big line items that the federal government spends are very popular, Social Security and Medicare primarily, and those are untouchable. Even President Trump knows that. So you have to look at other parts of the budget, which limit your impact considerably. And for the most part, when you try to cut line item style through the regular constitutional process, like Congress, you run into a reality that most federal programs have influential constituencies. I mean, the NIH cuts hit us very hard here in Washington state, but even Alabama's Republican Senator Katie Britt, a very close Trump ally, is nervous about what happens to labs and universities in Alabama. And that's why all of this requires this major expansion of the president's power, the whole unitary executive model. Republicans have concluded that the legislative process is just not going to be capable of truly overhauling the federal apparatus the way that they want and that they believe is necessary. You need like this national CEO type figure who will move fast and break things. And helpfully, the firings of a lot of people and installing more political appointees, all of that coincides with Trump's focus on loyalty. That's like a handshake of kind of your classic Grover Norquist types and the new MAGA people. So that's where we're at right now. And Congress is pretty much on the sidelines no matter what, Democrats would like to say. We're not hearing much of anything from Republicans. The nuance thing from Dan Newhouse is pretty much the strongest criticism that you're going to hear.
Yeah.
The courts are the only bulwark left. And there are a crazy number of lawsuits to keep track of. Yeah. What are you watching, Scott?
I'm definitely watching what you mentioned, lawsuits. Emily from the Federal Transit Administration and many others are kind of looking into their legal recourse. They have what's called a class-wide complaint. It's not exactly a lawsuit to like halt these firings. There are also union lawsuits over the deferred resignations and those so-called buyouts, which the unions say are illegal.
Yeah. So the idea of like whether people were fired for cause, is there going to be some way for them to claw that back? We're going to be watching those court challenges and where the Dojax falls next. There are DOD cuts coming. Firings are expected to start soon for civilian employees at the Department of Defense. There are 31,000 of those in Washington state. I think the big question I have is how soon everyday people, like Trump voters included, start to feel the effects of this downsizing? And will they connect it with the president's moves? Any final thoughts, you guys?
I mean, me personally, I'm watching to see how this starts to impact people in our state. Right now it's hitting federal workers, but, like so many people told me, people aren't going to get their checks, the Social Security checks. They're not going to like we're saying they're not going to be able to go visit their national parks. So I guess I'm just wondering what's going to happen next if people are going to get really angry and do something about what's happening.
Yeah, some of these changes could hit rural Washington really hard, especially when we talk about the Forest Service, where we started, and I do want to say that a USDA spokesperson just emailed me a little bit ago saying this is not going to affect our ability to fight wildfires this summer. But other folks I'm talking to, federal, Congress, state government, they are really worried about the fires that could start on federal lands. Those fires are going to burn through rural towns potentially that, often vote very Republican. And that'll be, interesting to see if people sort of connect that, right? Those layoffs in the Forest Service in places like Tonasket, Washington, like small towns. Well, it'll be interesting to see if they kind of draw a line between Trump cuts and wildfires.
Ashley Hiruko, investigative reporter for KUOW. Thanks for being here to walk us through all this and your conversations with federal workers.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me on.
That's it for Sound Politics today.
Today's episode was produced by Sarah Leibovitz. It was edited by Gabriel Spitzer. I'm Scott Greenstone.
And I'm Libby Denkmann. Thank you for listening, everybody. We're going to be back with Sound Politics next Thursday. And just a reminder, we say this every week, but I don't want it to go unnoticed. This show is only possible because of donations from our listeners. So folks who listen and donate to KUOW make this possible. We can't do it without you. So you can visit KUOW.org/politics to donate and keep the show going strong.
All those annoying interstitial ads you hear on other podcasts, we only have a few of them, and it's thanks to folks who donate. So thank you for that. Thank you for your calls and emails asking us questions. You can share your feedback or your questions or whatever at soundpolitics@KUOW.org or call us. Leave us a good old-fashioned voicemail at 206-221-0511. See you next week.